Hello and most welcome to 1641 of the Heidegger series. I will today continue with Paul Johnston's excellent work, Rethinking the Inner. We have previously passed through perception, thought, language, complexity of the inner. Now we are currently into the inner outer picture. And what we have been discussing is, among other things, how the confusion in language, confounding, are talking about innerness with some sort of essential hidden innerness, an innerness of experience that is isolated from the rest of the world, does not really participate in reality. This confusion and misapprehension has led to many of the philosophical understandings we have in our world. The Cartesian dualism is stemming from this misconception of how language really works. The duality is, one could say, a bit exaggerated according to Wittgenstein. No duality at all. It is rather Descartes making the same errors as the old when it comes to language. Confounding two absolutely different things. Talk about thinking, communicating thinking to others, and thinking itself. And as I lightly mentioned in 1637, we are never asking anyone what their inner experience is. We are just asking them what they saw. Nothing more, nothing less. Failure to understand that will lead to further questions, but the original issue will never be able to be resolved. It will not be resolved until we go into the real issue, the problem, how it started. already in the declaration, the problem of the inner. It's also clearly warned against any idea of seeing that the language game is about behavior. It's sort of Skinnerian take on reality. He's not a Skinnerian behaviorist, neither is he a convinced essentialist. Seems to be lying smack in between the two, but that is not true either. Actually, his standpoint, his take on the whole thing is so different it doesn't even bear resemblance either to the behavioristic stance nor the essentialists' stand. It's the difference, I would say, lies in Wittgenstein doesn't say, I don't agree with you, I have arguments for something else. It's more of, there is a confusion here. Look at it, give it a try. I invite you to understand how it started. From where it is stemming originally. Where it begins. And in 1637 I mentioned the clock, and I think the clock in itself is sheer brilliance. It's sheer brilliance because it sums up all the different varieties that has been carefully exposed in the earlier chapters, and I think if Johnston would have started with the clock, we would not have been able to understand it, but since the ground was already laid, you get access to an understanding. First, when you went through all the work that was before. And I think if I were to have read the clock from the very beginning, the very slight point that Johnston is making would not have caught me. I'm 100% sure. And I think this goes to show how careful one needs to be with this, and also to understand that a certain knowledge needs to be established before you go further. Doing it in the wrong order or trying to grasp something preemptively have very little chance of success. And when it comes to the example of the clock, I think maybe 6 months ago I would only thought that the one possibility would be that there is some sort of internal clock that we look into objectively, so we sort of observe the essence of time, and we make an observation of our inner clock, and then we can make a conclusion, sort of reason over the experience we just had, and say the time is 10 past 30. 10 past 13. Before that's done, it will not be possible. I think you will perpetually think of an inner clock. It's inescapable in a way. And I now see more clearly. I can just and my understanding here is that learning to tell the time is no different from all other things that we learn. Learning how to show pain, learning how to have emotions, the full complexity of it. And as was mentioned earlier in the book, we can learn the expressions for pain, and then we can go even further and be able to feign pain, imitate what we just learned, so to speak, and thereby you bring it to yet another higher level. it's easier to see now clearly that the complexity of feigning a behavior, of feigning pain, is incredibly much more advanced than just the more simplistic expressing it, which is still complicated. None of these things are simple in the essentialist or behaviorist view. It's far more complex. And I think I slowly begin to understand how complex it is. It takes time for that understanding to enter. But slowly a completely different foundational understanding of the world comes to the fore. A world where everything is, so to speak, intertwined, entangled, maybe, proper word. Everything is truly glued together. Sitting together out there in the world, even what I used to hold as my most inner things, I thought it was absolutely private and hidden. No, it's interactive in the whole world. One feeling is that sort of, at least for a moment, it feels like the I becomes decentralized, not being in just one spot, or not being in a spot. It's more like it is the electron cloud in the quantum mechanical scientific viewpoint, where the electron is not in a definite spot, but rather the electron is all over the atomic kernel. Being so situated everywhere at the same time. It's just in the moment of definition it gets a specific spot, otherwise it's equally distributed all over and all around. This is my initial feeling of the self. Slowly the gestalt, or the idea I had earlier that the I is like a kernel, it's like a germinate seeds somewhere inside of me. It's a sort of existence, a stain, or onda, like an ontic thing. But the understanding is that the I is in some way diffused all over, and the I is every relation in the universe. It doesn't have a sort of internal essence. It's oddly very close to Nagarjuna and Madhyamika. Quite sure it's still very different in many aspects, but it's a certain feel to it. But nothing is lost. What Wittgenstein, Johnston are looking for is, how does language really work? And well, I think that is maybe in need of a reformulation. I would rather say he doesn't tell us how it works, but rather taking away or clearing up some confusions. But he doesn't speak of an essence of language. As in the example of the clock, he's merely hinting to what has by then, at the end of the book, have become obvious, that we learn to tell the time in the same way we learn all other things we learn. And that doesn't mean that it has to be an internal thing, so to speak. And all of a sudden things becomes clearer. It's like a fog is leaving an airport and you're on pilot and you want to land. Somewhere in this you realize how all the problems started. Well, that's a bit exaggerated, not at once, but I get a feel for it. Still not 100% established. second here. Sorry about that. Continue. It's a different way of learning all together, I would say. And the difference lies in this thing takes time. It's almost like you retraining yourself, relearning some things, or the method of doing it is you need to try it out. Without wanting to do that, it will not work. So the non-argumentative style that Wittgenstein sort of has in his later works is not of kindness. Well, not only. It is more that this understanding is different. It needs to be in the use. Yeah. Once more we get a completely different view of what language is, or maybe share some similarities. And that is, I would say, that its use in the way you already use language, the confusions is sort of, how could you say, misuse, like you mishandling some instrument or machine you have. You have a blowtorch, or you have a screwdriver. And you do not really know the workings of that screwdriver. Maybe you're trying to use the handle instead of the pointy part of the screwdriver. And that simply will not do. It's not working to its optimum. With a deepened understanding, when you change your use, when it gets expanded maybe, and the tensions in the understanding, it's like you over tense part of yourself. Maybe it could be that it is even ultimately a bodily tension going on at the same time. Things connected to, for instance, your posture and your habitual way of moving, being, sensing, existing. in our way of being, that is where we go to retrain. I think that is in a way Wittgenstein is proposing a completely new way of viewing humans, or he's hinting to that, what I now come to have understood as incredible oversimplifications and, as I said earlier, misapprehensions of grammatical uses in language, and how that leads to a strained way of being an organism. The innerness can lead to these confusing questions as the Putnamian brain in the vat. It becomes nonsensical. It is no longer a question you can pose. As I mentioned earlier, the get here problem is not a problem at all. Confounding two things that maybe sounds the same, using the same words, the same markers, if you like, that of having knowledge and speaking about having that knowledge to others is not related. This is of course very similar to what happened, I think this happened early on in the development of thinking in the Western world, but later that came to sort of pair up with the Newtonian science and press even further that there must be an original connection, so you can find a first cause. First cause can be seen like this. You have an outside world that is causing your perception, so to speak. The outside world is, in this example, the origin. And then your perception can be the origin, the scientific cause of what you are saying about your perception to other people. Person A and B is talking to each other. One is saying to the other, "Do you see that man with the grey coat?" And in this scientific viewpoint, that would be like, you ask, do you have the perception that in front of you, in your insideness, do you have the perception that there is a man in a grey coat walking by? And you say yes, and that yes would be caused by your perception, and also of course the question. This view is extremely problematic. So there are a lot of jokers in this card game that can have similar actings as misconceptions. Well, let me just put them out there. Origin, first cause, innerness. Innerness is should be viewed as innerness should be viewed also as a first cause. It has several reasons for its misconception. Not only one. One feeling that now dissipates, which is quite nice, is like I felt earlier for the read of this book and some other. I also read Joachim Schulte, which is very good, and Livingstone, both excellent writers about Wittgenstein. But one perception you can have is that you are in a box, camera oscura, if you like, that the Renaissance painters used to make a sketch that would later be painting, with a little hole that we take in reality, and on the inside there is a reflection of reality. That disappears, that isolation, or it's also a sort of awkwardness, weirdness, that you're not really in here, you are, so to speak, shut off. And this is similar to the brain in the vat, actually. You are not in the world, you are a brain locked into a vat, bobbling about there, lying your nutritional solution. In this isolation, you have a perception that is relayed through electric wires to your brain. So you have the perception inside. This view just falls completely. And the pain in not understanding this now becomes more obvious, because you need something inside of yourself to sort of see the perception, see the instant photograph of reality. And you end up, if you're going to do a reductio absurdum, in absurdo you get an infinite regress, and there are little mannings inside your head that sees the inside picture. It never ends. So there are many of these confusions that gets cleared up, not argued against. Because I previously encountered a lot of arguments against the brain in the vat, but now you don't even need to mention it specifically, as I do here, just to give some extra zest to it. But with this it becomes much more obvious. Becomes clearer. The fog is clearing up, as I said before. It's dissipating, it becomes less and less of an issue. You will gain in the end a greater understanding of what you've been doing your whole life. That is, understanding, feeling, perceiving, experiencing. All those things that have always been around. Now these things are furthered and brought even to greater understanding. They get more refined. It is like you begin to understand how to use words properly, or how it works. It's an integral going into a deeper understanding. And the clock is, I don't know how many times I've been discussing the clock in different circumstances, and never ever before has the idea that there is some sort of either external clock or internal clock telling the time. But now it is completely different. Now there is a pointing to telling the time is absolutely different. What it is, we don't know, but it's obviously the whole complex webs of things we do and that are and that was and so on. But earlier we've been just talking about this with the clock problem, and I've never been able to rid myself of an innerness of a clock or an external clock. It had been very argumentative. Now it disappears. The problem is no longer there. It was there, and it became less of a problem slowly. There is no longer a need for arguing against the inner clock, and I've been doing that from science, where in quantum mechanics and the understandings of Lee Smolin and Julian Barber, there is no universal clock ticking about in the universe. And I came to the conclusion now that Wittgenstein solves also this problem. It's a matter of skill, if you like, or knowing the things, or knowing the drill that makes it possible for telling the time. And that, sorry the repetition, will also take time to learn, a lot of time. And we would most definitely not be equally as skilled in it. And I often mention and talked about, because it's one of these very strong experiences when I was traveling around many years ago, and I went to Japan, and it struck me how the trains were incredibly punctual. Any delay longer than 30 seconds resulted in a public apology over the speakers. Whereas here in my home country, 1 hour, 2 hours, there would be possibly some sort of apology, but delays are rather the rule than the exception here. And I thought about that as a different time conception, or having more access to the internal clock, being more, so to say, coordinated or correlated, adjusted to the internal clock. Compare these two, internal, external. Actually, in the confusion, they take the same position. It's either, as we have in classical physics, an enormous, well, doesn't have to be big, but a clock in the universe which all other times can be compared to. and the other one is the internal clock, the inside clock, somewhere in the brain probably, ticking away biologically, telling the time so you can see it in your share insideness. But rather telling the time is all the skill in the world and all the knowledge we have, a development of that. Just like when I'm talking to someone, I manage to hit a phrase perfectly, having the right words, as hinted in chapter 5, the musicality of language. Chapter 4. And when I have the feel for it, I will be able to really hit it, be able to get exactly the tone I want in the thing I want to say. There will always be a scale. I can always do it a bit better, a bit different. Telling the time is also in that way. And maybe, as in the example I introduced here, the Japanese people are more skilled at it. And it has to do with all their interactivity and all what is around them. You train yourself in this, and therefore the trains will be in time, but it takes the whole system into consideration. The trains, the one who's driving them, the ones who service them, and even the passengers, everything that's around. And I see now that makes more sense to take all these aspects in, instead of only having one sharp view, where it's only said that there's a clock somewhere and it tells the time, and that sort of is that. There's nothing more to it. So that's now strikes me as an absolute oversimplification. And of course a misapprehension as well. They are both into the game. So the misapprehension, of course, is what caused this universalism that was brought up by Paul Feyerabend. Paul Feyerabend's book, The Conquest of Abundance, where he saw all the peculiarities and idiosyncrasies being eaten up by universals in generalities. All the interesting things hidden out of view. This is a deepening understanding of this. it solves maybe the problems that Paul Feyerabend were fighting, and it's not really about generalities or universals. More specifically, it's a misunderstanding somewhere. That misunderstanding goes much deeper than things just somehow become universal, which presents a very likely explanation in The Conquest of Abundance, but now I get a deeper understanding of these things. I will put a pause here. Thank you.
Vi har gjort det korta, för ni har inte postat, ni har alla pratat med medborgarna där, men jag tror inte det får så mycket data på det, typ bara 2011 framåt.
So, continue.
Framförallt ser du skillnaden i stan.
I've been talking about the inner and outer picture and why this, how, but especially the purpose of the picture. Chapter 6 is to try to show how did this misunderstanding come about, how is it possible. And one factor is that what is usually taken as inner is not as accessible. The inaccessibility, I would say, is one of the strongest reasons for believing in an innerness. You can think about as like a safe down in a cellar, you cannot get into it, and I don't know what other people are deeply inside thinking. I am not, I think, more correct. I'm not able to predict their behavior, and it's not a little thing. I look for an explanation directly or direct in my perception, and I assume that is hidden, it is within, it's on the inside. And that is the reason I cannot see it. It is its situatedness. So when I say inner, to a certain extent it means I don't see it, I cannot experience it, I don't have access to it. Wittgenstein shows, he asks us to try out, could it be because the very grammar of language that makes the inner inaccessible? In its nature, speaking about my perceptions or handling them is an outside purpose, often has an outside purpose. As if I ask somebody, have you seen my wallet? But there in the first person perspective there is not that thing going on, and therefore others do not have access. It's not participatory, or not as participatory. I would say it participates to a certain extent still. Everything is a web of relations. Everything is interwoven. These are the things that are because of what they do, not directly accessible. It's not, they're not hidden in their nature. And there is some comparison here. It could be a language that nobody understands, so it's complex structure. It's pure Greek to me.
Och jag ska ju försöka gå under hösten och prata och hjälpa dem med att bygga utbildningar.
No one that speaks that language wants to hide anything. It had no purpose. There was no purpose that made the language more inaccessible. There are other factors that makes it.
Han på i Kungsbacka. Och nu är det så att det var klassiska, jag gick tillbaka till de här gamla landskommunerna och församlingsstatistik och befolkning och sådana grejer. Och de var ju helt chockade över att det bodde så lite människor i det som var gamla Kungsbacka stad. De trodde att man var mycket fler som bodde där än vad det var, utan de hade liksom inte fått grepp om hur stål såg ut. Och det var ju samma grej med Herrhundar. De hade ju inte fått någon koll på
Nej, alltså Kungsbackens stad kan man väl egentligen ta bort för jävel. Alltså det var så oerhört lite.
Ja, det
Ja, men vad fan då?
So it's a grammatical aspect that is the hiddenness of the first person perspective. That, I think, is one of the strongest reasons.
Men i alla fall så fanns ju det var jävla gamla ruttna småhus. Och sen så var ju hela jävla Uppsala allt gjort. Det är så
This is also a second view of seeing how the misunderstanding originated is to speak about aspect seeing. Aspect seeing is having different takes of reality, and you could say that the first person perspective is clumsily expressed, but the first person perspective is an entirely different aspect. You can think about the duck rabbit here. Viewpoint is different because the originating point is also very different, and that is one of the reasons why understanding doesn't come about. Where you are situated makes it hard, makes it impossible, the other viewpoint. And that is a sort of hiddenness expressed in the confusion. So here the confusion starts. You have a different aspect, you don't reach into that one other aspect of the first person. And therefore you directly get a feel that it's inside of that person, deeply hidden. It's a Jungian archetype or the subconscious of Freud deeply, deeply buried inside the person, so maybe the person cannot reach into it as well.
Så vad är min tanke?
No, it's still out there, but it's harder, much harder to read off or be in contact with. And to a great extent also for the person himself.
Samtidigt så har jag som att nu på något sätt så även om det bestämmer alltså mycket på områden. Det du jobbar med är tresiffers och det finns ändå upp till 6 siffror alltså så här låttrick. Och jag har för mig att de matchar ganska mycket. Alltså de matchar församlingsgränser, de matchar
But this way of explaining it makes it not so hard to understand. You can reach into the understanding this way. And at the same time as you do that, a lot of the confusion disappears. A confusion that leads to people assuming private language or starting to think that thoughts originates in words. And once you have the idea that thoughts are inner speech, you will have to add intention, that is meanings, and attach meanings to words, and once more you end up with an infinite regress. No way really of getting out of it.
Ja, det som är demografiska statistikområdena det är ju att det tycks vara ungefär liksom i mänsklig valfrihet. Och det är ju så de har bestämt sig.
So it's a bit tough actually. The more you will try to get an understanding once the confusion is there, the worse it will get. It is like going into quicksand. When you start moving in order to get out, the more the quicksand will hold a grip on you. And meaning, intention is all a lot of the philosophy of language is stranded in this meaning idea of language, and then meaning itself has to have a secondary meaning. There are similarities here to the perception that you need a homunculus to see that projected photo or video of reality. Here you need something else to read off the meaning of the word. So then in the end you end up with a language of meaning separated from the ordinary language. And that has actually been proposed. That there is sort of a cognitive grammar. I do not really recall his name. There are several authors. But cognitive grammar has been proposed that it's like pure language on meaning. The language where meaning resides, and that is somehow awkwardly, of course, attached to ordinary verbal phonetical phoneme, pronounceable language,
som församlingarna såg ut innan.
a sort of glue between the intention and
Fram till 95 så var församlingarna basen i all folkräkning. Det var de som gjorde det. Så att man,
intention and extension, I think it's called.
Det var liksom inte till skattemyndigheterna. Så att, och är man, nu är det så dumt att man slår ihop massa församlingar och sånt, men det går att spåra med hjälp av de distriktens och lite handarbete så går det att spåra tillbaka till 1850 istället för 1950. Så det är lite coolt.
Det där som blir
Also here you have an infinite regress, and it's not a far-fetched speculation to see the development in Chomsky looking for the innerness of language. He's talking about the expressed language, but it still has a sort of innerness, a kernel, an origin from where it all stems and develops. The original point that causes everything. I studied linguistics for some years in the 90s, and I remember this quest for the ultimate reason for language, looking further and further. We were all heavily stuck in the quicksand, a mud that wouldn't leave our feet, sucking us down. And of course, for every move of the legs, we get further and further down.
Jag hade ju ganska oklart definierat. Hade ju tre grejer att göra där. Det var ju tre väldigt synliga grejer. Men det så att ingen av de där tre betalade för att vara i Visby. Så att jag tog hela Visby-grejen som jag helt hade investerat. Och han var helt centralt, inte centralt att man syns det. Förberedd man var inte minst det.
So a lot of problems when the philosophy of language gets dissolved. Maybe a greater part of linguistics gets dissolved. So it's a lot of strain that all of a sudden eases off, and it's a sort of heaviness that disappears. You feel more light-hearted. You know, little by little, more and more, you learn to know that this is how it works. Because you can try it out yourself, or it is in you. It is in the things you already know somehow, at some level. And it is this level that Wittgenstein is addressing. He wants to look into what you already are doing. That it was only your myopia that hindered you from seeing the full truth. Well, it's a bit exaggerated, but something that insinuates. So I I mentioned a few in the last lecture, 1639, I think, the philosophy of consciousness, and the hard problem of David Chalmers, how they get dissolved. And now I go further into looking at also problems within the philosophy of language. Can dissolve, dissipate, evaporate, and only leave behind a lightness, an easiness.
Det var ett jävla hopp. Jag tror jag jobbade mer än mellan 21 och 22 än vad jag gjorde de 10 åren innan. Det var tillsammans. Alltså det är otroligt. Så att...
Men du fick väl information på 10 mars, det började vara liknande. Och den har legat på
och så märker man den här typen bara gå ut och handla vissa grejer och blir extremt dyrt. Olivolja till exempel, det är extremt känsligt för det här. Varför vet jag inte det?
Jag har också sett att olivolja, något annat var det Afrika och
Well, it's another hint here. Science of cognition is another something that I also studied, and how the science of cognition.
Det måste ju vara den största bluffen som finns. Vanliga sådana här skelett-rakhyvlar. Ja, jag använde dem en gång, jag tror man ska använda det. Men jag tror jag köpte ett 6-pack rakhyvlar här på Routledge. 200 spänn. Vad kan de kosta att göra?
Men det eller de var billiga. Jag har ju en bra tid med jag är väldigt dansare.
Ja, jag har också en tyngd och det är
Alltså, jag råkar ut något sånt här märkligt här när man börjar närma sig 50 så börjar kroppen ge upp i olika sätt känns det. Och det är att min hud, jag måste raka mig med huden var 10:e dag ungefär, annars kan jag inte protestera. Även om jag trimmar liksom så jag får massa konstigt utslag och skjuter bara flarna och sådär.
Det låter jättemärkligt. Det kan vara någon bieffekt.
I think it's an expression, and
jag har haft, när jag framförallt under tonåren har jag mycket mer ögonen liksom och sådana grejer. Jag har i ögonbrynen och då är det tydligt att runt munnen, ögonbrynen och upp i håret.
in cognition it was assumed very long that it was an innerness of experience, and without Wittgenstein I would say there's no way of getting out of that. You're stuck and you go deeper into that rabbit hole, so to speak, and it's also the idea of the innerness is reflecting the outerness. That was of course strengthening it. Was interesting, very decisive scientific discoveries when it was discovered that on the inside of the eye there is an inverted picture of the world, so to speak. And of course that strengthened definitely the idea that we are a camera obscura, we are a sort of a black box that somehow takes in reality through a little hole, two small holes that are our eyes, and two other holes on the sides of the head, on the side of the head, taking in a everything that's audible. Nose also equipped with 2 holes, taking in smell. So the tactile sense is more sturdy. It's not that easy to trick. But it's also taken up that I think that was mentioned in the 2nd chapter, that we most commonly directly experience objects. So we just see something and we say, hey, there's an object. And that's where Johnston brings in the tactile sense, where you can see that, well, you don't touch and directly see an object, you feel something rather. It's a sensation that indirectly, in a very effective way, questions this object seeing of the outsideness. Gibson was the first one to really question that, and what he discovered or what he proposed is incredibly close to Wittgenstein in some aspects. And Gibson does not accept the outsideness or its twin, the insideness. Instead he uses affordances, and affordances, I would say they're pretty close to use, less verbal. They are still nouns, which is I think a shadow from the old way of thinking. Affordances are use, purpose. They're ready to hand. You can handle them. You can do things with them. They serve always a purpose in your life. They're not out there by themselves, like ready-made objects in a still world, a museum, I think I mentioned in 1639. A museum of objects where everything stands still and do not move about, inertly waiting for us to have an intention with them. So we are the only little, how can I explain? We are the only light glimmer in the universe. Rest in the representational view or the confusional view, the rest is only just waiting there for to be used. No connection to us. And of course, this was the reason for the creation of the inertly Newtonian space that didn't do anything, just a placeholder for the deadened things that did not participate in any manner, in any way. So Wittgenstein is also dissolving Newtonian space, oddly enough. shows that even in this case there was some sort of original misconception, confusion of sorts that led to that fixation on the argument. It also dissolves pretty well Carl Sagan's famous statement that we are just a speck of dust in the eternity and endlessness of the universe. We have no role to play whatsoever. That's the misconception paired together with the amplification that came from the Newtonian space, I would say. Newtonian space, I had to add also because of the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution on top of that has led to it being so much more suffusing every part of our lives. And that is also addressed by Wittgenstein. It's one more of these confusions that gets cleared up slowly with a lot of work. It's not easily done. You feel all of a sudden more light-hearted, and you can put your energy, your willingness to solve problems to more important things, to more important things. You don't have to go too much into these unresolvable problems. I spent years of energy going into science of cognition, linguistics, and much more. Pondering in these problems like the brain in the vat and the intention problem or the origin of language, universal grammar. It's like in a very, very slow way hitting your head against the wall, against the walls of use, against the walls of how you use language yourself. And I don't think it's very hard to see that that is an almost endless chore. Where could it find its termination? You're left with no other choice than continue to continue to continue. Here, with Wittgenstein, there is quite a different possibility, and that is of putting your energy towards the things that are true problems, or things that you want to invent, explore, discover, be creative about. So I think it's also an appeal to creativity, to truly new thinking. That's maybe another aspect to be brought in here. The late Edward de Bono, who wrote, I think it was like 70 or 80 books about creativity and how we should break instituted thinking in order to get to the creativity of things. I think he would be very helped by the understandings coming from Wittgenstein. Because it shows that the current fixation on an innerness of an original, of truth, of intention, that every word has an intention glued to it. That stops creativity, and one starts to think that I only need to, that there is a finite amount of these intentions or meanings, the byproduct, the side product of confusion. And I just need to have a certain amount of these intentions put together, and then when I get all the information, I will have a clearer picture of reality. Something that de Bono thought that in the long run to sort of a stalemate, point of no return, of no more development, or at least a lessened amount of development. Here one can see clearly that there is a misconception rather than, as the people call it, a fixation on truth or the old. It's not about the old or tradition. It's the confusion that sets us to look for an origin where there is no origin, or origin doesn't even make sense. Where the origin is you only stopping or hindering yourself, and then afterwards you call it, I was looking for the origin. You can't even look for it. How sad isn't that? You can just continue and continue. I will read a bit more about the clock because I think it's very revealing. I think it's quite helpful. Yeah, this is from page 220. It's directly where I left off in 1637b. Here, the postulated phrase is like the inner clock, for we no more infer what happened from a trace than we consult an inner clock to guess the time. Furthermore, Wittgenstein argues that the fact that we can correlate damage to the brain with loss of memory does not show that some form of trace theory must be correct. Imagine the following phenomenon. If I want someone to take note of a text that I recite to him, so that he can repeat it to me later, I have to give him paper and pencil while I am speaking. He makes lines, marks on the paper. If he has to reproduce the text later, he follows those marks with his eyes and recites the text. But assume that what he has jotted down is not writing. It is not connected by rules with the words of the text. Yet without these jottings, he is unable to reproduce the text. And if anything in it is altered, if part of it is destroyed, he gets stuck in his reading or recites the text uncertainly or carelessly, or cannot find the words at all. This can be imagined. What I call jottings would not be rendering of a text, not a translation, so to speak, in another symbolism. The text would not be stored up in the jottings. And why should it be stored up in our nervous system? In fact, there is no reason for assuming that there must be a trace, or that what we remember must in some sense be stored up. The normal functioning of certain parts of the brain may be a prerequisite of memory. But this does not mean that the correlation can be continued in ever greater detail. The example of memory leads Wittgenstein further, for he goes on to confess that nothing seems more plausible to me than that people someday will come to the definite opinion that there is no copy in either the physiological or the nervous system which corresponds to a particular thought or a particular idea of memory. This implies that there can be psychological regularities to which no physiological regularities correspond, and as Wittgenstein provocatively adds, if this upsets our concepts of causality, then it is high time they were upset. Here Wittgenstein argues that in investigating the mind, there may be limits on how far causal explanations can go. Returning, for example, to the case of memory, he asks, why should not the initial and the terminal states of a system be connected by a natural law which does not cover the intermediary state? According to this view, certain correlations would be possible, but not complete correlation in all details. Take the example of thinking. According to Wittgenstein, it is quite likely that there's no process, quote here from Remarks on the Philosophy of Psychology, there's no process in the brain correlated with associating or thinking, so that it would be impossible to read off thought processes from brain processes. I mean this: if I talk or write, there is I assume a system of impulses going out from my brain and correlated with my spoken or written thoughts. But why should the system continue further in the direction of the center? Why should this order not proceed, so to speak, out of chaos? The case would be like the following. Certain kinds of plants multiply by seed, so that the seed always produces a plant of the same kind as that from which it was produced. But nothing in the seed corresponds to the plant which comes from it, so that it is impossible to infer the properties or structure of the plant from those of the seed that it comes out of. This can only be done from the history of the seed. So an organism might come into being even out of something quite amorphous, as it were, causelessly, and there's no reason why this should not really hold for our thoughts, and hence for our talking and writing. Confronted with this example, we may still be inclined to claim that there must be a full causal story, both in the case of the mind and in the case of the seeds. However, there are no grounds for saying that this must be so. In both cases, Wittgenstein outlines something that is conceivable, and hence something that must be at least be accepted as a possibility. Furthermore, in the case of the mind, Wittgenstein's account is not only possible but also plausible. Again, this someone might object that Wittgenstein's account involves treating living beings, and in particular humans, in a pre-referential or biased manner. The argument can, however, be turned on its head. For why should we treat the animate and the inanimate, the living and the mechanical, in the same way? Surely what is most striking is how different the two are. For it is not just that we view the animate as more complex than the inanimate. Rather, we see the two are separated by an unbridgeable gulf. Since this is so, one might well argue that it is the idea that the two are the same which requires support, not its antithesis. To illustrate this point, consider a problem in the study of vision. Quote, how does it come about that I see the tree standing up straight, even if I incline my head to one side, so the retinal image is that of an obliquely standing tree? Well, how does it come about that I speak of the tree as standing up straight, even in these circumstances? Well, I'm conscious of the inclination of my head, and so supply the requisite correction in the way I take up my visual impression. But doesn't that mean confusing what is primary and what is secondary. Imagine that we know nothing at all of the inner structure of the eye. Would this problem make an appearance? We do not in truth supply any correction here. That explanation is gratuitous. Well, but know that the structure of the eye is known. How does it come about that we react in this way? But must there be a physiological explanation here? Why don't we just leave explaining alone? But you would never talk like that if you were examining the behavior of a machine. Well, who says that a living creature, an animal body, is a machine in this sense? That seems to be the hidden assumption here, that the human body is a sort of machine. And we do recognize this viewpoint, I think, all the way back to the Renaissance. That we are a clock that you can twist and turn up, and the reason for the clock moving is somebody was there to arrange it before, to give it a twist, to wind it up. Without that person winding the clock up, it wouldn't tick. So naturally we assume that to be a winder up from the beginning. That makes it possible for the clock to turn. The ultimate reason. And the ultimate reason for all machines are in the maker, so you can ask. Whereas in this case, indicated by Wittgenstein, that might not be a legit question at all. And I think it's interesting with this with memory. You can compare that to the movement of the hand. If you were to record me with a video machine, video recorder, and you take away my mouth, the sound, you only have the hands. And maybe I'm in Italian, I say, I need the hands to speak. They accompany the speech, but it's not enough to only have the hands. They don't depict what is said. It's a family similarity, but they are not connected, utterly connected. There's no causal glue in between them. And looking for an explanation is exactly the thing that makes us even more into the, as I said before, even more into the depths of the rabbit hole. And the more we look, the more obscured the path out of the rabbit hole will be. We will see less and less, understand less and less. And I think still to this day, the science of cognition are stuck in that rabbit hole. They all assume that memories in the head are sort of having a causal connection in some way with what the memory is. Once more, there's the innerness, the origin of the memory. Wittgenstein points to, as I would explain it, not Wittgenstein, all the connections that are in the world, that's the memory. Cannot be something so little as a little scribble inside the head. Memory is out there all over the place, the web of all interrelations. And of course, this web, the entanglement, is also what we discovered in physics. I won't compare Wittgenstein to physics today, but it can be done, and I will do it. But it goes to show in quantum mechanics we have entanglement for everything. You cannot isolate a certain part of the universe and locally have a reality like this coffee shop. You need an absolute whole of everything. There is some interesting parallels with physics here. Before it ends, I will say thank you very much. It was more of a free lecture. I don't know how much dishwasher disturbed there. I hope you caught it still. Say thank you very much for your patience. Have a very pleasant morning. Bye for now. Also, this orchid is illusory.